Dr. Matthew Lang had a reputation that preceded him. At St. Augustine's Hospital, his name carried both admiration and dread. To administrators, he was a prize hire, a board-certified internal medicine physician with a stack of credentials, a fellowship under his belt, and the kind of confidence that made patients believe he was the smartest man in the room. To patients, he was brisk, dismissive, and efficient, sometimes too efficient. And to the nurses who worked beside him day and night, he was a storm, loud, commanding, and almost never willing to listen. The trouble was that for years, the system rewarded him. He discharged patients faster than most, ordered tests decisively, and rarely second-guessed himself. Charts closed quickly, beds turned over, and metrics looked good on paper. But the cracks were there, and they widened each time he brushed aside a patient's words or ignored a nurse's concern. He was so convinced of his superiority that he stopped hearing anyone but himself. And then there was Nurse Claire Benton. Claire was 34, a decade into her career, with a reputation for quiet competence. Where Matthew stormed through the halls, she moved like water, listening, observing, piecing together details the way a detective does. She was the kind of nurse who remembered which patient had mentioned shortness of breath that wasn't written down, or which worried mother had quietly said her son's chest just looked wrong. To Matthew, she was background noise. To the patients, she was everything. It was inevitable that they would collide. The evening began with a case that seemed ordinary enough. A middle-aged man named Frank Holbrook came in complaining of stomach pain. He was pale, sweating, and slightly hunched on the gurney. His vitals were stable, but his wife kept insisting that something wasn't right. Matthew swept into the exam room, white coat flaring behind him like a cape. Abdominal pain, huh? How long has it been going on? Couple days, Frank managed. Any nausea? Vomiting. Frank shook his head weakly. His wife leaned forward. Doctor, he's been dizzy too, and... Matthew cut her off with a raised hand. I'll ask the questions. He tapped the chart on the tablet. It's probably gastritis. We'll get you some antacids and fluids. Nothing to worry about. Claire, standing quietly at the bedside, frowned. She'd been the one to triage Frank. He had mentioned a strange tearing sensation earlier that day, a sharp pain radiating to his back. She had written it down in her notes, but Matthew hadn't bothered to read them. Doctor, Claire said carefully, the patient described the pain as sudden and tearing this morning. It's radiating to his back. And his blood pressure dropped when he stood up in triage. Matthew waved her off. Everyone exaggerates in triage. It's reflux. I've seen it 1,000 times. Claire's stomach clenched. She knew what he was missing, the possibility of an aortic aneurysm, a silent killer that presented just like this. Doctor, I think we should order a CT angiogram. Just to be safe. Matthew turned to her, irritation flashing in his eyes. A CT angio? For reflux? Do you have any idea how expensive that is? The radiation exposure? You want to fry this man's kidneys because he had a cheeseburger too late. Frank groaned, clutching his side. His wife's eyes filled with tears. Please, just listen to her, she begged. Matthew snapped the chart shut. We'll do basic labs and give him fluids. That's it. He spun on his heel and left. Claire stood frozen, fury rising in her chest. She looked at Frank's ashen face, at the sweat beading on his forehead, and made a decision. She pulled the resident aside. Page Radiology for a CT angio. Now. Don't tell Dr. Lang yet. The resident hesitated. But, do it, she said, steel in her voice. If I'm wrong, I'll take the blame. 2 hours later, the scan came back. A large abdominal aortic aneurysm, dissecting and minutes away from rupturing. Frank was rushed to surgery. The vascular team said he wouldn't have survived another hour. When the news reached Matthew, his face went pale. For the first time in years, he had been exposed, outplayed by a nurse he considered beneath him. He tried to spin it, saying he would have ordered the scan eventually, but everyone knew the truth. Claire had saved the man's life. And Matthew's mask began to crack. The tension between them simmered for weeks. He became harsher, more sarcastic, lashing out at Claire in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. He interrupted her in rounds, mocked her suggestions, and ignored her reports. But Claire refused to bend. She listened to patients, she documented meticulously, and she corrected his mistakes quietly when she could. The staff began to notice. Whispers spread. Lang doesn't listen. Benton saves his ass. It all came to a head one night in the ICU. A young woman, 28, had been admitted with sepsis after a kidney infection. She was septic, febrile, and barely stable. Claire stayed by her side, monitoring every drip, every shift in vitals. The patient's fiancé kept telling anyone who would listen that she had a penicillin allergy, severe enough that she had once ended up in the ER as a teenager. Claire wrote it down twice in the chart, highlighted it, and mentioned it to Matthew directly. But when Matthew strode in, chart in hand, he didn't even glance at the allergy section. We'll start her on piperacillin tazobactam. Broad spectrum, best coverage. Doctor, Claire interjected immediately. She has a documented penicillin allergy. Severe. Matthew rolled his eyes. Half of those are bogus. People say they're allergic when they just got a rash once. This is sepsis. She needs the big guns. She said she couldn't breathe. She almost coded. It's in her history. Please don't order it. He sneered. Are you a pharmacist now? I said piperacillin. Claire felt the heat rise in her chest. She stepped forward, lowering her voice, but not her resolve. If you hang that bag, she could die. You're not listening. The patient's fiancé, standing nearby, shouted, She told you. She can't have that. What's wrong with you? The confrontation froze the room. Other nurses stopped. Residents stared. Matthew's face contorted with rage. Fine, he barked. Cefepime then. Happy? He slammed the chart shut and stormed out. The patient lived. But the moment traveled through the hospital like wildfire. Nurses whispered in break rooms. Residents murmured in hallways. The legend of Dr. Lang was bleeding out, replaced by the story of the nurse who actually listened. The breaking point came a week later. It was a minor disagreement at first, a discharge summary that Matthew insisted be filed despite Claire warning that the patient wasn't stable enough to go home. Voices rose. Matthew accused her of undermining him. Claire accused him of endangering patients. They were in the charting room, alone except for one resident who sat frozen in the corner. You've been on my back for months, Matthew snarled, his face red. You think you're smarter than me? You think a nurse knows better than a doctor? I think you're reckless, Claire shot back, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. I think you don't listen and patients are going to die because of your arrogance. Someone has to stop you. Something in Matthew snapped. His hand lashed out before he even knew what he was doing. The sound of the slap cracked through the room, sharp and horrifying. Claire's head whipped to the side, her cheek burning. For a moment, silence hung between them like smoke. The resident gasped. Oh my God. Matthew froze, horror dawning in his eyes. But then his pride surged back. She provoked me, he muttered. She was insubordinate. Claire straightened slowly, her cheek blazing red, her eyes locked on his. You just ended your career, she said quietly. And she was right. The fallout was swift. Claire filed an incident report within the hour. The resident corroborated her story. Security footage showed Matthew storming out of the charting room minutes later, his face twisted in rage. By morning, the hospital's HR department was involved. Administration convened an emergency review. Matthew tried to spin it, claiming it was a misunderstanding, that Claire exaggerated. But the evidence was overwhelming. He was suspended first. Then, after weeks of hearings, he was terminated. His medical license was reviewed by the state board. News leaked into the press, doctor fired after striking nurse. Patients who once trusted him recoiled. Colleagues who once feared him avoided his calls. Matthew's world collapsed. His marriage, already strained, dissolved within months. His children, embarrassed and angry, kept their distance. Applications to other hospitals were quietly rejected. His name, once associated with brilliance, was now synonymous with disgrace. Meanwhile, Claire continued her work. She didn't celebrate, she wasn't built that way, but she carried herself with quiet pride. She had defended her patients, defended herself, and refused to be silenced. Nurses thanked her. Patients trusted her. Even the residents, once terrified of Matthew, sought her out for guidance. Matthew Lang faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in hospital hallways, the doctor who wouldn't listen, who thought himself untouchable, who destroyed himself with one slap. And Claire? She kept listening. Always listening. Because in the end, that was what saved lives. And let's continue to our next story. The boy came in just before dusk, thin arms folded tight across his chest, as if he could hold himself together by sheer will. His name, according to the intake paperwork, was Caleb. 9 years old. He wore a faded t-shirt 2 sizes too small and jeans that sagged around his hips, held up by a belt with new holes punched in crudely. The triage nurse, Melissa, knelt to his level to take vitals, but what caught her attention first were the bruises, yellowed, purpling, at different stages of healing on his forearms. "What brings you in today?" she asked gently. Caleb's eyes darted to the adults behind him. A man and a woman, his parents, presumably, stood stiffly. The man's jaw was clenched, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. The woman's gaze was fixed on the tiled floor. Neither looked at their son. "Stomach hurts," Caleb mumbled. His voice was flat, rehearsed, as though he had been told what to say. Melissa nodded, jotting it down. His vitals were concerning: low weight for his age, slightly elevated heart rate, and a blood pressure that seemed low even for a child. She looked at him again, noting the pallor of his skin, the way his shoulders rounded inward. Something about the way he flinched when she adjusted the blood pressure cuff made her pause. He was admitted to pediatrics for observation. The attending physician, Dr. Patel, ordered routine blood work and an abdominal ultrasound to rule out appendicitis. But Melissa couldn't shake her unease. She had been a nurse for 12 years. She had seen patterns before. Kids don't just bruise like that on accident, not in clusters that matched the outline of fingers. While Caleb was prepped for his ultrasound, Melissa joined Claire, another nurse on the evening shift, at the nurse's station. She lowered her voice. "Something's not right with this kid." Claire glanced at the chart. Low BMI. Multiple bruises. And look, missed vaccinations. Parents report he's homeschooled, rarely sees a doctor. She exhaled sharply. "You're right. Red flags all over. Should we report?" "Not yet," Claire said, cautious. "Let's see what he tells us. Sometimes the story comes out if we listen long enough." Melissa nodded. That was the hardest part of pediatrics, not the IVs, not the fevers, not even the emergencies. It was listening between the words, finding the truth kids were too afraid to say out loud. The ultrasound showed nothing acute. His stomach pain remained vague, unexplained by labs or scans. But Melissa noticed how Caleb winced when his father placed a hand on his shoulder, how he tensed when his mother spoke sharply to him. Later that night, while his parents stepped out to get food, Melissa sat with Caleb by his bed. The boy stared at the ceiling, small hands twisting the blanket. "Caleb," she said softly, "sometimes when kids come to us, there are things going on at home that make them hurt. Not just their stomachs. Do you feel safe at home?" His eyes widened. He swallowed hard. I don't know." "That's okay," Melissa reassured him. "You don't have to answer right away. But if you ever feel like you want to tell me something, I'll listen. And I'll believe you." His lip trembled, but he said nothing. Still, the silence was loud enough. Melissa wrote a detailed note in the chart, documenting bruises, behavior, and her conversation. When the parents returned, the atmosphere shifted. The father, whose name was Robert, demanded to know why more tests weren't being run. "You doctors always drag your feet. The boy's in pain, fix him." Dr. Patel explained calmly that no urgent condition had been found, and observation was the best course for now. Robert scowled. "Waste of time." He turned to Caleb. "Hear that? Waste of everyone's time, like always." Caleb's shoulders hunched lower. His mother, Denise, said nothing, just wrung her hands and stared at the floor. The nurses exchanged glances. They'd seen this dynamic before: the domineering father, the silent mother, the child caught in between. Over the next 24 hours, the signs multiplied. Caleb ate ravenously when given food, as if he hadn't had a decent meal in days. He startled at loud noises. He kept glancing at the door, like he expected someone to burst in and scold him. Melissa caught him changing into a hospital gown and saw more bruises across his back, thin scars along his upper arms. "What happened here, sweetie?" she asked. He froze, then whispered, "I fell." It was the answer every abused child gave. Automatic. Trained. Melissa squeezed his hand. "Okay, thank you for telling me." But inside, her resolve hardened. She and Claire conferred, then escalated their concerns to Dr. Patel, who agreed it was time to contact social services. The call was made discreetly. A caseworker was dispatched. Meanwhile, the staff kept careful watch, documenting every interaction. Robert grew more irritable, pacing the hall, complaining about delays. Denise hovered silently, eyes darting nervously. When the caseworker, Ms. Alvarez, arrived, she asked to speak with Caleb alone. Robert exploded. "You're not talking to my son without me there." His voice thundered through the ward. Claire stepped forward, voice steady. "Hospital policy allows private interviews when abuse is suspected. You'll need to wait outside." Robert's face darkened, but Ms. Alvarez stood firm. Eventually, with a growl of frustration, he stormed out, dragging Denise with him. In the quiet of the exam room, Caleb finally spoke. Tears streaked his thin face as he whispered about the yelling, the hitting, the nights he was locked in his room without dinner. He showed Ms. Alvarez the belt marks across his thighs, faded but unmistakable. Melissa, standing nearby, felt her throat tighten. She wanted to scoop him up, shield him from every cruelty. But she stayed professional, documenting carefully, knowing that accuracy mattered. When Robert returned and demanded to take Caleb home, Dr. Patel informed him that Caleb would remain admitted until the investigation was complete. Robert shouted, cursed, threatened to sue. Security was called to escort him off the ward. That night, Caleb slept more soundly than he had since arrival. Melissa checked on him frequently, smoothing the blanket, adjusting the monitors. In the stillness, she thought about all the children she had seen over the years, some saved, some lost in the cracks. She promised herself Caleb would not slip through. The investigation unfolded over days. Ms. Alvarez gathered reports from school officials, neighbors, and now the hospital. The picture became painfully clear: years of neglect and physical abuse. When the decision came down that Caleb would be placed into protective custody, Denise wept silently. Robert raged. But the court order was signed, and the boy was officially removed from their care. The day Caleb left with the caseworker, he clutched Melissa's hand tightly. "Will it be better?" he asked in a small voice. "Yes," she said firmly, even though she knew the road ahead would be hard. "It will be better. And you'll never be alone again." He nodded, eyes wide with something that looked like hope. After he was gone, the ward felt different, quieter, heavier, yet lighter too. The nurses gathered at the station, exhaustion etched into their faces, but also relief. They had listened. They had acted. And, because of that, a boy's life had changed. Melissa stared out the window as dusk fell again, thinking about how easy it would have been to dismiss the bruises, to accept the parents' explanations. But listening, truly listening, had made all the difference. And that was the heart of nursing, she realized. Not just giving medicine or checking vitals. Listening. Believing. Protecting. Always.